just announce, and then we'll get into our Sikha. And if you don't already have a Chumash or a Chayenu or a Dvar Malchus near you, that would be very helpful. But first, we want to say Mazel Tov to all of the graduates and their families, the various graduations. This week, Yuti Pollinger, Yuti Pollinger's daughter, Chana Pollinger, is getting married. Amir Hashem, Mazel Tov on that. Rachel Kaplan became a great-grandmother again. Mazel Tov, another one of her children, are newly minted grandparents. Chana, I don't know the last name. Chana's grandson, Aaron Pinchas HaKayim ben Rivka Malka, is celebrating his upshernish. And if there are any other simchas, please unmute yourself and let us know. We want to join in your joy. And this should only be simchas for everyone. Mit freiliche Herzen, Gesundheit, freiliche. I think that before we go into the Sikha today, it'll be very helpful to just look over the story that the Rebbe is talking about here. So for that purpose, we're going to go to the beginning of Perek Yud Daled. It's the very end of yesterday's Chitas, and the very end of today's Chitas, and we're going to be going through tomorrow's Chitas, so we'll get a head start. So it's Perek Yud Daled. So after the Meraglim come back with the negative things that they have to say about Eretz Yisrael, Vatisa kola eda vayitnu es kolam vayifku am balayla hu, and all of Bnei Yisrael wept. They raised their voices. Vayiloinu al Moshe bal Aaron, and they complained against Moshe and Aaron. Vayomer aleim kola eda lumasnu be'eretz Mitzrayim b'midbar hazeh loy masnu. If only we had died in the land of Mitzrayim, or at least died in the desert. V'lama Hashem mevi yisanu el aretz hazeh linpol b'cherev. And why is Hashem bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Nashenu v'tapenu yulavaz. Our wives, our children will be left to plunder. Halei toiv lanu shuv Mitzrayim. Would it not have been better for us to go back to Mitzrayim? Vayomer ish alachiv nitna reish v'nashuva Mitzrayim. Let's get another leader. We'll appoint a new leader. We'll return to Mitzrayim. Vayipal Moshe v'Aaron al pneim lefnei kol kahal adas b'nei Yisrael. And Moshe and Aaron fell upon their faces in front of all of b'nei Yisrael. V'Yeshua ben Nun v'Chalev ben Yefuna min ha'Torah es ha'aretz karu bigdehem. And Yeshua ben Nun and Kalev ben Yefuna, who, as we know, were the two from the Meraglim who resisted the words of everybody else and maintained that they could go into Eretz Yisrael. They tore their clothing, they tore Kriya. They announced to Bnei Yisrael, the land through which we crossed to explore, to do reconnaissance. It is Toiv, and it's ma'id ma'id. It's very, very good. Im chafetz banu Hashem v'hevi yosanu la'aretz hazayis u'nusana lanu ha'aretz asher hi zavas kol advash. If the Eternal desires, He'll bring us into this land that flows with milk and honey. Ach b'Hashem al timroidu. But please don't rebel against Hashem. Va'atem al tiros ha'am ha'aretz. And don't fear the people of the land. Ki lachmenu heim, they're like bread to us. Heim sor tzilam alehem. Their shadow of protection has left them. Hashem itanu. Hashem is with us. Al tiram. They made this last stand appeal that Bnei Yisrael should not fear the inhabitants of Canaan. Vayayimru kala eda, and Bnei Yisrael then basically made their intentions known. Lirgam Aisam Bavanim, to stone Yeshua and Kalev. Uchvoid Hashem Nira Ba'el Ma'id al Kol Bnei Yisrael. At that moment, Hashem's glory appeared to all of Bnei Yisrael. Vayem Hashem al Moshe, and Hashem said to Moshe, Ad anu yinatsuni ha'am hazeh. For how long will this people continue to provoke me? Vad ana lo ya'aminu. And for how long will they not believe in me? irrespective of all of the tremendous miracles that I did for them. Akenu padever, I'm going to smite them with a plague, with pestilence, v'ayrishenu, and I will completely destroy and annihilate them. And instead of them, I'm going to make you in a greater and a mightier nation than they are. So Moshe says to Hashem, you can't do that. Mitzrayim will hear this. They're going to hear that you took this people out from among them with your great power. And they will say about the inhabitants of that land, Shamu ki ata Hashem b'kerev ha'am. You have heard you're the eternal, whose presence resides among the people. Asher ayin b'ayin nira, and you appear to this people before their eyes. Va'anan cha'omed alehem, u'ba'amud anan atahilach lefneim yomim ba'amud eish leila. So they're going to hear all these great things. How great you are, how you took them out of Mitzrayim, how you take care of Bnei Yisrael, how you lead them day, night. And then, v'heimatas ha'am hazeh ki ish echad. And now you're going to kill them like one person. V'amru hagayim asher shamu shem'acha leimar. And all the nations that heard about all the greatness that you did, your great reputation, they're going to say, "Midbilti yicheles Hashem lahavis hamazel haaretz asher nishba lahem v'yishachatem b'midbar." Something went wrong, lost his power, unable to bring them in, so he just slaughtered them. V'ata yigdalna koyach Hashem kasher dibarta lemar. So please let your power become much greater, as you said. Hashem erech hapayim v'rav chesed noisei avon v'fesha v'nakeh v'lo yinakeh poikid avon avos al bonim al shleishim v'al rebeim. You can't do this, Hashem. And you also have to remember what you taught about yourself. You're slow to anger, abundant in kindness. You bear any transgressions or iniquity. You overlook sin for those who do tshuva. How can you don't overlook the tshuva that they do? How can you do this? You have to please forgive the big avera that these people did, because your kindness is great. And just as you have borne them, these people, from when you left them out of Mitzrayim until now, please continue to do that. Vayomer Hashem, and in reply Hashem said, Salachti kidvarecha, I have forgiven them for the reasons that you have stated. V'ulam chai ani, however, and this is like an expression of like taking an oath. Vayimoli kved Hashem es kol haaretz. Ki kol ha'anoshim haroyim es kvedi. For all the men who saw my glory, all these people that saw all the great things I did, and nevertheless they tested me 10 times, and they didn't listen to me. They are not going to see the land that I promised to their forefathers. And all of those who provoke me will not see the land. Now, if you look at Rashi, Chof Beis, that is our point of departure today. It's not a classic Rashi Sikha, but it is an analysis of Rashi juxtaposed against what other Mefarshim teach us. So on the words Vayinasu, Rashi says, Kimashma'i. You should understand the word Vayinasu at its literal meaning, which means they tested. Then on the word Ze Eser Pa'amim, Rashi says, Shnayim Bayam, they tested me twice at the sea, Ushnayim bamon, and twice regarding the man, Ushnayim baslav, and twice concerning the quail, Kediisa b'Meseches Arachin, as is written in Erachin, in that Masechet of Gemara. Okay, that's the Rashi. Now we're going into the Sicha. Shelach Gimel. Seif Aleph. Min pasuk vayinasu eisi ze eser pa'amim that we just read. Lamdu Chazal teach. Asher asara nisyonos nisu avasinus hakadosh baruch hu b'midbar. That our forebearers tested Hashem 10 times in the Midbar. Legabe oisam asara nisyonos matzinu kama deos. Regarding what exactly were these 10 tests or trials, we find a number of opinions. Umehen. And among those opinions, the Rebbe is going to give us 3 different opinions. And then, of course, we have Rashi's opinion that we have read. First opinion, Aleph b'Mesechet Erchin. In Mesechet Erchin, the Gemara says that the 10 miracles were as follows. Shnayim bayam, twice at the sea. Shnayim b'mayim, twice regarding water. Shnayim b'man, twice regarding the man. Shnayim b'slav, twice concerning the quail. Achaz b'egel, v'achaz b'midbar paran. Once the chet ha'egel, and once is the chet hameraglim that took place in Midbar Paran. Ukimefurat lahalan b'gemara sham, and as is further detailed in the Gemara there, what does it mean, Shnayim bayam? What are the 2 incidents regarding the Yam Suf? Achaz b'yirida, one happened when they were about to go into the Yam Suf, when they said, Hamabli ain't kfarim b'Mitzrayim. This is like the refrain. Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you took us out here? That was when they went into the waters. Va'achaz ba'aliyah. And then they tested Hashem when they came out on the other side. And they said, Kishem sha'anu oile mitzad zeh, kach Mitzrayim oile mitzad acher. No, nothing great happened here. We're going out from this side. Mitzrayim is going out of the sea from the other side. And our nemesis, our arch enemy, is still going to be where they always were. We're still going to be pursued by the Mitzrayim. So that was the 2 at the Yam. Shnayim b'mayim. And then they tested Hashem twice regarding water. Once in Mara and once in Refidim. Shnayim b'man. Twice they tested Hashem, or in 2 different ways they tested Hashem regarding the man. Hashem said, Al teitzu, do not go out to collect the man on Shabbos, vayetzu, and they went out. And Hashem said to them, Al teisiru, do not leave any man over from day to day. You're going to get what you need for the day, and don't hoard any of it, don't put any of it away for another day. Vayesiru, and they, in fact, did put away man for the next day. Shnayim b'slav, twice they complained that they wanted meat. Slav rishon de parshas b'shalach, b'slav sheni de parshas b'halaischa. Ha'egel, chet ha'egel, umidbar paran, that is the sin regarding the meraglim. That is the listing in the Gemara. Then the Rebbe says, there's another listing, Ba'avos Reb Nassan. And Avos Reb Nassan, Isa, there it says, Shasheres Nisyonos Heim, what were the 10 tests? Chet ha'egel, Vayitzma Shama'am Lamayim Berefidim, that they were thirsty for water, they complained for water in Refidim. Himru al Yamsuf, they rebelled against Hashem at the Yamsuf. Hameraglim, the Chet Hameraglim, which is our most recent sin, the one that is in our Parsha. Taflu al Haman, they disparaged or they denigrated the man. Machlakasai shel Kairach, the machlaikas that Kairach brought against Moshe. Slav, their request for quail. The Gimel Hanasyanos, and 3 additional tests, B'Tav'era, B'Masa, or B'Kibbutz HaTaiva. Tav'era HaMis'aynanim, that was a sin where a bunch of Jews complained in a more, let's just say, generic manner about how bad things were in the Midbar. B'Masa B'Kitas Haman, there they collected the man when they weren't supposed to, on Shabbos and before. And Kibbutz HaTaiva, this is the second time that they requested meat. Lefi Deyazu, so when you look at this listing, Nimnim Kam, counted on this list is Chetamis Einanim, Maise Kairach, V'Taflu Al Haman. There are 3 ways in which Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem that are not delineated in the list in the Gemara. And on the other hand, what's not on the list is the first time that they complained to Hashem about the bitter waters. Nisayan Aleph Bayam, Nisayan Echad Bayam, Nisayan Echad Baman. Whereas the Gemara says that there were 2 Nisyanis, there were 2 ways in which the nation tested Hashem regarding the Yam Suf. Here in Avos Reb Nosson, we only have once, and the same thing with 1. Instead of twice, only 1 time. And now we have the 3rd listing. Aseres Hanisyones Laminyan Harambam. And now we have the listing of the 10 tests, according to the Rambam. The Perish HaMishnayos Shaloi, found in his Perish on the Mishnayos. And the Rambam lists as follows: Yam Suf, Mora, Bakashas Haman b'Midbar Sin, Al Teisiru. Hashem says, don't leave anything over from day to day, and they do. Al Teitzu, the second way in which they tested. So you see that there are 3 ways in which they test HaKadosh Baruch Hu regarding the man. The Rambam lists the very ask, their very request for man as a way of testing Hashem, with the additional 2. Mayim Birafidim, Masa Egel, Tav'era, which is a sin of the Mis'aynanim, the more amorphous complaining about life in general. Kibbutz HaTaiva, they're wanting more quail, the Chet HaMeraglim, and the sin with the Meraglim. Lefi Deyazu, so if you analyze this listing, Noisef al Eisem Haminuyim b'Meseches Erchin, on top of what's listed in the Gemara, you have the Chet HaMis'aynanim, V'gam Bakashas Hamon al Yidei B'nei Yisrael, and in this counting, you have also the very request for man, Bimkaimam, and instead of, and so what did the Rambam delete from the list in Erchin? Hishmit Rambam Nisayan Echad B'Yam v'Nisayan Echad B'Slav. So he also gets 10 by deleting 2 of the things that are listed in Erchin and adding the Chet HaMis'aynanim and the Meraglim. Okay, so thus far the Rebbe has introduced us to the 3 different listings of the 10 ways in which Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem. Beis, Seif Beis. Rashi b'Peirushay ala pasuk ze eser pa'amim. Rashi, as we saw on the word ze eser pa'amim, Perish, what did Rashi explain? Shnayim bayam, u'shnayim bamon, u'shnayim bislav, v'chulei, k'de'isa b'meseches erchen. Those are the words of Rashi. 2 times they tested regarding the Yamsuf, twice the man, twice the quail, etc., as written in the Gemara. Kedas HaGemara be'erchen. V'ne'atam shalei nakat Rashi b'derech hapshat kedas avos Reb Nosson. Okay, so the Rebbe wants to analyze which list did Rashi use. He makes it very clear. We don't even have to look for that. He says, like in the Gemara. So what's the pshat? Why did Rashi not, for instance, choose the list of Abbas Reb Nassan? The Rebbe says, the fi hapshat, move on, is understood. The fi shabeis hanisyanis demaise kairach v'taflu alaman, because in Abbas Reb Nassan, he includes kairach's insurrection and the way in which Bnei Yisrael disparaged the man, possibly because there was no waste, and that scared them, and they thought they were going to die. These two stories, Iru Achar Chetem Meraglim, they occurred after Chetem Meraglim, Shahu HaNisayan HaAsiri. That has to be Al Pi Pshat, the 10th Nisayan. Why? Sharei, because Hashem says, Vayinasu Oisi Ze'eser Panim. You can't argue with that. And that is Nema B'Parsha Seinu. It's written right in our Parsha, Gabe Chetem Meraglim. There's nothing unclear about this. So therefore, Al Pi Pshat, Rashi cannot embrace the list of Avos Reb Nassan because Rashi eniba loy basi ela lefarish pshut shel mikra. So it has to be Al Pi Pshut shel mikra. Aval tzarich lahavin. But we have to still understand. Rashi pshut shel mikra kedas hagemar b'meseches erchin v'loy kefi shamana oisem harambam b'perish mishnayos. Okay, so we weeded out Avos Reb Nassan as a contestant for being the list that Rashi would embrace. But why not the list that as delineated by the Rambam? In other words, we don't expect Rashi to say the Rambam says this, but why not those things as delineated by the Rambam? Mashaloi mana, so the Rebbe says like this: Mashaloi mana is bakashas haman betor nisayin. The fact that Rashi would not opine like the Rambam that asking for man is testing Hashem, harei ze move on. That's very readily understood. Mishum sharashi pshuta shel mikra svirale delechem shalu kahiken. Because Rashi has already made very clear that it was totally okay, it was appropriate to ask for man. They don't know what they're going to eat. Their supplies have dwindled. That's not testing Hashem, that's asking Hashem. V'lachein nasalem HaKadosh Baruch Hu haman derech chiba. Rashi points out that Hashem didn't just give them what to eat. Hashem gave it to them with tremendous affection. So we understand why Rashi doesn't think that should be on the list. Ubim kaimai manas love harishain. And in place where the Rambam says that asking for man was one of the tests, Rashi replaces that with the first time that they reference love. Why? Because Rashi, again, has already told us, the basar shalu sheloi kahigen, that they're asking for meat on top of their nutritional needs being met so comprehensively, that was not appropriate. Avol, first of all, Aleph, Chet HaMisayinin Mesupa Beferish B'Torah. But the Chet HaMisayinin is written in the Torah. Hanisayin Hasheni Bayam Ba'aliyah Loi Niska B'Pshut Shel Mikra. But now the Rebbe still wants to understand what is going on with Rashi not embracing the Rambam's listing. So he says, the Chet HaMisayinin is right there. So you don't have to list it. On the other hand, the second Nisayan on the Yam is not listed in Pshuta Shel Mikra. The Adrab, on the contrary, Miperish Rashi B'Parshas B'Shalach, from what Rashi says in Parshas B'Shalach, Shepoltan Hayam al Sfasai, Kidei Shelo Yimru Yisrael Kashem Sha'anu Chulei Kachem, that the booty was washed up on the shore of the Yam to show Bnei Yisrael that the Mitzrayim had perished, so that they won't say that just like we're exiting from one side, they are exiting the Mitzrayim from the other. muchach. So we can prove from this. Sharashi nakat shebepoel lo haya nisayim b'aliyasa min haman. Hayam. So based on this, Rashi seems to be saying that there was no nisayin. Ume'acha sherashi mefarish pshuta shel mikra haya lo limnois es chet hamisoinim v'lo limnois nisayin noisef bayam. And if Rashi is all about pshat, then he should have listed the misoinim and not list the nisayin, the second nisayin on the yam, behetel perish Rambam, in conformity with what Rambam writes. Shamana rak nisyonis shekulam divrei akosovim. Rambam says that he listed all the ones that are in the pasuk clearly. If Rashi is all about Pshuta Shel Mikra, he should have gone in accordance with the Rambam, v'lo k'di'isa b'Maseches Erchin, and not like it says in Erchin, including that there were two nisyonos of the Yam, especially the Rebbe says one of them Rashi already repudiated. V'oid and more. Kevan sherashi mana shnayim b'yam nimtza. So if you're going to count shnayim b'yam according to the Gemara, then we find sheyachad chet hamisoinim shehu divrei akosov, that if you count the sin of the misoinim, which is straight out in the pasuk, hine bisman chet hameraglim kfar hayu yud aleph nisyonis b'midbar. Then it comes to 11. But the Eibush just said, you tested me 10 times. So basically, the Rebbe is showing us that something is up in this Rashi. It's not simple at all. And the Rebbe is going to have more questions on this Rashi. But his first question here is, exactly what does Rashi include? It's not like this. It's not like this. Why is it the way it is? Why does he embrace what the Gemara says over? So, Abbas Reb Nosson, it seems simple why he did not take that approach. But it's not simple why he didn't take the same listing as the Rambam. Gimel. And before answering that question, the Rebbe, of course, asks more questions, which are all part of the resolution. We also have to understand. Ba'avas Reb Nosson, Mikasher kama v'kama me'aseres hanisyones im pasuk Eila hadvarim asher diber Moshe gomer b'midbar ba'arava gomer v'di zahav, etc., etc. In Avos Reb Nosson, he links a lot of these 10 tests with the sins that are hinted at in that very famous opening pasuk of Chumash Devarim, shehim nirmazim b'shemay shenimnu b'pasuk sham. Rashi also, and we're going to look at what Rashi does there, opines that while it says that these were places that the Jews were, really it's talking about sins that they did in these places, or these places, whether they existed or not, are allusions to sins that he did. And the Sifri says the same thing. That all of the ways in which Bnei Yisrael tested HaKadosh Baruch Hu are the same sins that are alluded to in that famous pasuk in Devarim. Now let's look at what Rashi does there. V'chein nakat Rashi. Rashi cites shahapasuk ela dvarim goimer koilel divrei teichachais. Rashi says that this is a pasuk that includes reprimand. V'asher mana kan kol hamekoimei shechisu lifnei hamakim. And what this pasuk does is enumerate all the places where Bnei Yisrael angered Hashem, ubehemshech dvarav, and then in the continuation of his commentary, Pirate Rashi delineates as hachatoim hanirmazim kan. The different sins, v'zel l'shoinai, and this is its exact wording. Bamidbar, mashech isu bamidbar she'amru mi temusenu koimer. When it says Bamidbar, this alludes to the fact that they anchored Hashem, constantly said, we should have died in Mitzrayim, and so different iterations of that. Ba'arava, bishvil harava shechatu b'val pa'or. This is the sin of Baal Pa'or. Mulsuf, this is the sin al mashahimru b'yamsuf. They rebelled against Hashem at the Yamsuf. Bein paron ubein tafel v'lavan, shetaflu alaman shehu lavan. This is an allusion to the fact that they disparaged the man, which was white. Bamidbar paran, al yidei meraglim. This is a sin of meraglim. The chatzeres, this alludes to the machlekes shel kairach. The di zahav, this alludes to the cheta edom. Ulefi ze nimtza. So when we look at this Rashi, we find shahapratim shenimri b'pasuk b'parshas Devarim einam oisam henyonim daseres hanisyanishem meseches erchin shehevi Rashi b'parshasenu. So now we find that there's an inconsistency, because in Devarim Rashi cites a certain list, but in our parsha it's not the same list. The Sifri and the Avos Reb Nosson opine that it's the same listing, but we see that according to Rashi's opinion, it's not the same listing. V'tzarech bir, so we need to understand. Mipnei ma loy nakat Rashi command the Amar b'Sifri ba'Avos Reb Nosson shedivrei hatachacha shel Moshe Rabbeinu nemru klapi oisem hachatayim shaleim hechiach Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael ba'Amar v'yinasu oisi ze eser pamim. We need to understand. Rashi is all about consistency. Why two different listings? Dalit. Still have more questions before we get to the resolution. B'lashon Rashi b'parshasenu gufa eina muvan. Okay, so until now, the Rebbe is questioning why Rashi chooses this list and not other list. Now the Rebbe is going to parse the text of Rashi. Aleph. Kevan shebelav hachi lo yehetik Rashi es kol aseres hanisyonos. Since Rashi did not list the entire 10 ways in which they provoked and tested Hashem, Ela kasav shareitz ladazos befratios yedia she'ena negas lapshuta shel mikra kan v'lachein lehebizos kan ya'ayin b'meseches erchin. But rather, Rashi says, it's not neged to the pshat for me to list everything, but if you're curious, go to the Gemara, and that's where you're going to find it. Like Rashi says, v'chulu k'di'is b'meseches erchin. If so, mipnei ma mana shisha mitoichem v'lo kasa b'kitzer shnayim bayam b'chulei kedisa b'seches erchen. If you're not going to list them anyway, then what are you listing 6 out of 10 for? You could list the first and then say v'chulei. Beis haloshem b'meseches erchen hi shnayim bayam u'shnayim b'mayim shnayim b'man Shnayim bislav chulei. That's how the listing is in Erchen, the first 8 of the ways in which they tested. Aval Rashi b'perush, but Rashi, in his perush, dileg al shnayim b'mayim, he skips over the second thing that the Gemara says, v'koilalem b'chulei. He includes that in his etc. Shekasav achar shnayim bislav. So he lists the first 2, the third 2, the fourth 2, and skips over the second set of 2 sins with the Yamsuf. Why do that? Sorry, skips over the 2 with the water, with their request for water. Why do that? And even more difficult to understand, among all the 10 ways in which they tested Hashem, Hayachid shenemar love beperish because of Shabnei Yisrael nisu ba'is HaKadosh Baruch Hu mi bein hashnayim b'mayim. Of all the ways in which they tested Hashem, it's only regarding the water that the Torah says that they tested Hashem. Hanisayim b'refidim, when they asked for water in refidim. V'davka nisayin zeh loy hiskir Rashi b'Yerusha al vayinasu v'koilei b'v'chulei. And so of all the ones that he lists, he dafka skips over this one, the one that would seem to be firmly ensconced on that list because it's right there in the Torah. Hey, l'chayra, seemingly, haya efshar liyashiv ha'she'elo shebesiv daled shebetzion l'meseches erchen ein kavanas Rashi l'shar daled hanisyanis shaloi hetik b'perushay. So the Rebbe says, seemingly, we might be able to explain what we just asked, what he just asked in Seif Dalet, in a very simple way. That Rashi is not looking so much to tell us about the 4 ways in which Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem, that Shaloi Hetik B'Perushay, that he did not list, that Rashi has a very particular focus. He wants to focus on these 6 instances. Or to say it differently, to say it a little bit differently, Kasher ben Chamish l'mikra yilamed is a pasuk vayinasu oisi ze eser panim. Ben Chamish l'mikra reads a pasuk. Hashem says, "You tested me 10 times." So what's he going to do? He's going to start looking for those 10 times. So the Chamish Mikra will find a number of examples where it's very clear that Bnei Yisrael were testing Hashem. So what Rashi wants to do is simply list the times where it's not so clear. Because the ones that are very clear, the Ben Chamish L'Mikra can find on her own. The Bas Chamish L'Mikra can find on her own. But there are those that's not so clear. V'lachein, ein Rashi tzarech lefarit shnayim b'mayim hamifurashim b'kasel. So therefore, he skips over the 2 times that they complained about water, because it's right there. It is nothing ambiguous about it. Val derech zeh lo yes cheta egel, the cheta maraglim, and the cheta egel is very clear. The cheta maraglim is very clear. Rashi does not need to list those. Mashe enkein, but in contradistinction, bayam, when it comes to the yamsuf, keibon because of nimtza rak nisayan echad, because in the pasuk you only find one way in which they tested Hashem, and that was on their outbound flight when they said, "Couldn't you just kill us in Egypt?" So therefore, he had to tell us, actually, there was another time. Same thing with man. There's an opinion that you also have to count their very asking for man. Because the Torah tells us that they complained. So you could have a havamina, you could suspect that that's also a nisayan. Keperish Rambam. In fact, the Rambam does see that as a nisayan. That's why he lists that there were 2 with man, not 3. Shahashnayim b'man him al tesiru b'al teitzu. V'al derech ze b'negei love. And also regarding the quail, there's ambiguity. Yesh deyash hasipurim because of Oides Haslav, the Parshas B'Shalach, Parshas B'Haleischa, einam beis mu'urais nifradim. There are opinions that he didn't actually ask for the quail on 2 different occasions. Elahainu hach, it was one time that they asked, that's treated twice in the Torah. Now, this is all part of the Rebbe saying, perhaps you could explain what Rashi is doing in this manner. That he only lists the nisyanes about which it's not exquisitely clear in the Torah that you could call it a nisyan. But now the Rebbe slugs it up. He says it's a big stretch to explain it this way. Shari kashem she'ena davar borim bakashas haman nimnis betor nisayin. Just like it's not clear if you should count asking for man as one of the nisayonis, one of the ways in which they test Hashem, kevan shalechem hu davar hechrachi. Because after all, bread is not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. Kach yesh nasafek im ha'maisa b'mara. So you could, in the same way, question or push back and say, why should their asking for water be reckoned as an asayan? Isn't hydration just as necessary? Water is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And you could push back on the chet ha'mesayanim and say, this wasn't a way of testing Hashem. They were simply venting about real issues. Well, what do you want from them? So the Rebbe says, nope, that's not, this can't be the way to understand Rashi. V'yesh loymar, we might say, the Rebbe's signature, v'yesh loymar, habir b'chol zeh. This is the explanation. And really, what's going to happen from here until the end of the Sikha is the Rebbe teaching us what is a test. In other words, what is inappropriate? When do you say that it's not okay? And when do you say it's just human beings asking for what they need, venting, scared, anxious? Perish Rashi, Siv Vav. Perish Rashi Khan. Ba behemshach leperusha leil minei al tebes vayinasu. The Rebbe says, first of all, okay, the Rebbe is going to put this all in context. First of all, let's put the second Rashi in context of what Rashi said right before. And that is that on the word vayinasu, and they tested, Rashi simply says, kimashma'i. You should understand the word vayinasu literally. They tested Hashem. And like Mefarshim explained, sheyesh makam lefarish tebes vayinasu b'muvan shel kaas. There are Mefarshim that explain that the word vayinasu could mean they provoked, they angered. V'lachein melamdeinu Rashi shevayinasu oisi hainu kimashmai shebnei Yisrael nisu uvachanu es HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the chiddush of Rashi in that very short first comment on this pasuk is that no, it's not anger, it's not provocation, it's testing. They tested Hashem. Va'al pizeh miyushav b'pashtos mipnei ma ein Rashi yochel linkoy keshitas harambam. And once we understand the context, that Rashi is giving us a list of tests, not provocations, not ways in which they incensed Hashem. He cannot embrace Rambam's Shita. We already know why he can't embrace Avos Rav Nosson. Now the Rebbe is going to explain why he can't embrace Rambam. Because the Rambam includes the Messiah. Lefisha al pi pshuta shel mikra l'das Rashi lo yachayachet ze inishal vayinasu oisi, because Rashi has already made clear his opinion about the chet hamesayinim. He says ki im alila ha'ech lifresh me'achrei hamakim. Over there, Rashi says that what they wanted with the mesayinim It was a libel. It was an alilah. They were looking for an excuse to be angry at Hashem so they don't have to listen to him. V'lachein, therefore, Rashi does not embrace Rambam's list. Tafas Rashi is a page from Masechet Erchin, but he takes the list from the Gemara. Lefi shedavka yud me'oros elu yesh behem hachet devayinasu oisi, because it's dafka, the list as listed in the Gemara, that delineates the 10 times that Bnei Yisrael tested, not angered, not provoked, tested Hashem. Nisayan HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzat chalishus be'emuna. They tested Hashem because of their weakness in their faith in Hashem. V'zeu gam tam hashinui ben apratim haminoyim b'perish Rashi kan or b'perish Rashi b'parshas Devarim. And this is also the reason why we have a different listing here and a different listing in Devarim. Because b'parshas seinu midubar edes inyanim sheim nisayan. Because in this parsha, Rashi is fixated on vayinasu, tests. Ve'ilu b'parshas Devarim midubar edes divrei teichacha shel Moshe al chatoi b'nei Yisrael b'chlal lav dafka elu shehem nisayan hachatoim ha'ikriim v'haklolim dedar hamidbar. In Chumash Devarim, in that iconic pasuk, Rashi there is focused on the sins, not the testing, but the sins. Which sins? The most basic, the most general, the most iconic, the biggest sins of Dor HaMidbar. Hachet beval pa'ar, himru b'yamsuf, taflu al amon. These were all huge sins. Shalzen nenshu b'nechashim hasrafim. They were punished for the complaints about the man with the scorpions, the snakes. Chet hameraglim, ma'isa kairach, chet ha'egel. I mean, these are the iconic sins of that door. But in our parsha, Rashi's looking at the ways in which they tested Hashem. And the Rebbe is going to explain what a test is. But first, amnam adayin tzarich lahavin. We still have to understand. Hein emesh berev hamekoyim is vayinasu hu lashon nisayan. It's true. In most places, vayinasu means to test. Aval benivun didan harei akasav mamshich vayinasu oisi v'lo shamu b'koili. But in our pasuk, Hashem says they tested me. They didn't listen to my voice. Hainu shebepoel loy shamu l'tzivoy Hashem. Practically speaking, they didn't listen to God's commandment. Vimkein hayamatim yoyse lefarish vayinasu oisi miloshen kas v'loy miloshen nisayan. In our pasuk, it would seem that vayinasu should mean they angered me. Because right after vayinasu, it says v'lei shamu b'koili. Ukimuvan, as is understood, l'nasis Hashem ain't a kosher behechrachim avera al tzivei Kadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe says, and just so we understand, testing Hashem is not necessarily connected. It's not of necessity connected to trespassing Hashem's command. Like we see in the Gemara's listing, it's not necessarily that they contravened a command of Hashem. So to explain, Rashi, what compels Rashi to say on the word vayinasu that it is kimashmoy, literally that they tested? It's not just because vayinasu usually means they tested. But rather, if we zoom out and we look at the general story, And now we're going to understand, now the Rebbe is going to answer the question, which you will remember. The Rebbe says, the Manashech, if you're not going to list all 10 sins, why are you listing 6 out of them? Why don't you just list the first thing that says in the Gemara and say v'chulei? The Rebbe says, now we're going to understand what Rashi is doing. And it's going to become clear what he did in his first parish when he says vayinasu means kemashmai. So context, context, context. So zooming out, ches. And here the Rebbe is going to reference the psukim that we looked at the very beginning before we went into the Sikha. V'yuvan behektim kama protim hatzrichim iun beparsha. And we're going to understand this better by first prefacing with a number of conceptual questions we have on this story. After Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to smite them with a plague, I'm going to annihilate them. Ta'an Moshe l'Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Moshe says in response to this, Moshe says to Hashem, V'shamu Mitzrayim, V'amru al Yeshev ha'aretz hazeh shamu, V'himatas amazeh, V'amru ha'goyim, Mibli yecheles Hashem goymer. You remember what Moshe said back to Hashem. Are you kidding? How can you do this? You have a reputation to uphold. The Mitzrayim saw what you did there. They told the people that live in this country. But now, by this behavior, if you kill all of Bnei Yisrael, they're going to come to the conclusion that you simply can't bring them in to Eretz Canaan. Can't do this. The Rebbe says on this reply, on this rebuttal of Moshe, tzarich iyun. This really needs to be understood. How is it possible? Shemilvad ha'taina v'amru ha'goyim mibilti yecheles Hashem goymer lo matza Moshe shum taina v'limutzchus kedei levatel sakana deva'akenu v'arisenu dechlal Yisrael. Shishim ribui levad anashim v'atav anashim lemata miben chav u'lemayla miben samach. Rebbe says, how is it possible that Moshe can conjure no other rebuttal, no other limutzchus? We saw what he did after Chet HaEgel. And here, the only thing he says to Hashem is, your reputation is on the line. He can't find any way to protect what is effectively about 3 million people. When you factor in the 600,000 women, children, and the men below 20, and the men over the age of 60, they're all going to be killed out, and Moshe has nothing else to say except not a good look. Second question, Beis, Moshe bikish mekadosh baruch hu slach no lavayin amazeh kegoydel chazdech av asher nesas lamazeh mitzrayim v'ad hina. We read that pasuk. Moshe said, you've carried them so far. Forgive them on this also. But Kadosh Baruch Hu hiskim lazeh. And Hashem agreed. Va'amar, and he said, famously, salachti kidvarecha. Ve'ena muvan. Me'achar shesalach Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. So it's not understood. Hashem says, salachti kidvarecha. He forgave them. So where's the efficacy of this forgiveness? And right after that, Hashem says, they are not going to see Eretz Yisrael. So he forgave them ish, but still, this huge punishment, test. And now we come to the explanation that's going to pull it all together. When Hashem said that this door is not going to go into Eretz Yisrael, this was not an arbitrary punishment. Ela Tivis mechatam umatzava. But this was the natural outgrowth of their sin and their general situation. In other words, it wasn't a punishment, it was a consequence of who they were, what they were. Kol ma shesipru hameraglim itis Eretz Yisrael givoras yeshvei aretz v'chulei haya emes. Everything that they reported was true. There were, in fact, very, very powerful nations that inhabited Eretz Canaan. Kach shaknisa l'Eretz Yisrael haysa yechela liyez dafka ilu haya lahem bitachon chazak biyechelas Hashem b'ayis Yisaf shem bli habeit al gvuras yeshvei haaretz yachal kadosh baruch hu laseis biyad Yisrael koyach avor nitzachin b'derach nes. The whole thing could have been, would have been an out-and-out miracle if they would have had the strong bitachon in God's ability and in Hashem's miracles, that notwithstanding how strong the inhabitants of the land are, Hashem could give those nations into the hands of Bnei Yisrael easily because of Nisim. Ukedivrei Kalev Shehevi Rashi, and the words of Kalev, which Rashi cites, V'alei kara lanu es hayam, v'hayrid lanu es haman, v'higis lanu es aslav. Kalev said, hello, don't you remember what Hashem just did for us? Allah na'ala afilu b'shamayim. We can even go up to heavens. If Hashem were to say, come up to heaven, make ladders and come up to heaven, we would be matliach. We'd be able to do it if only we had bitachon in Hashem's greatness. It was all going to be, could have been supernatural. And this is what we read earlier. But Hashem said to Moshe, Va'ad ana lo ya'aminu bi. Until when will they not believe in me? Notwithstanding all of the wonders and miracles that I did for them. Akenu b'dever. I'm going to smite them with a plague. Because they are in this situation, Hari'enam kli l'hanhaga nisis. They are simply not a vessel, a conduit for miracles. V'i efshar lahelicham la'eretz Yisrael b'derech shel kala eses. They are not calibrated with miracles, so I can't bring them into Eretz Yisrael with miracles. It's not that I want to do something to spite them. It's not a punishment. There's no alignment here. Valderech shalamanu le'il b'pashtus shel mikra v'im telchu imi keri goymer v'alachti afani imachem keri. In B'chukaisai, Hashem says, right there in the pasuk, Pshuta shel mikra, if you are going to act to me in a sloppy way, casually, happenstance, then I'm going to reciprocate. O memela, akenu, I'm going to smite you. There's going to be a plague. So what did Moshe answer to this? V'shamu Mitzrayim v'amru mibilti yecheles Hashem goymer. Now the Rebbe is answering that question. Why did Moshe use this argument? He had no other limud zchus on Bnei Yisrael, on Klal Yisrael. But the Rebbe is explaining, because Hashem is saying, I'm going to smite them, I'm going to annihilate them because they don't believe in me. So Moshe Rabbeinu is saying to Hashem, according to your logic, you're punishing them because they don't believe in you. And you're threatening to kill them all like as if at the same time, like one person. But you know what? Yimgram lemida rabba yoseh shelo yaminu bi. It's only going to lead to a greater degree of lack of faith. Ki Mitzrayim goymer yomer bli mibilti yecheles Hashem. Now you have Bnei Yisrael not believing in you. And if you kill them all, you're going to have the whole world not believing in you. Don't do this. So now to this argument, the Rebbe says, Hashem said to Moshe, Salachti kidvarecha. I'm going to forgive them in accordance with this argument. Meaning, okay, Perish Rashi, B'shvil ma shamarta pen yomim rebilti yecheles Hashem. Because you said that the nations are going to say Hashem doesn't have the ability to bring Bnei Yisrael, okay, so I'm going to suspend the way in which I told you I'm going to kill them. They're not going to all die at one time in a plague. Omnam haslicha bitla esachet memela sa'inish. It's true, Hashem's forgiveness obviated the sin and the punishment. Shaloya hamisa kish echad, that their death should not be in one fell swoop, like they would all fall like one person. Aval b'negei l'gzeira, but the consequence is the gezerah. Shaloy likanis eretz Yisrael loy ha'ila haslicha. For this, the forgiveness did not help. Lefi shegoyim hachisaron canal, because the reason for this deficit eino einish al chet. The reason that Hashem is now telling them, I'm not going to be able to take you into Eretz Yisrael, the reason for this is not because Hashem wants to punish them for the sin. It's because they are in a space of not believing in Hashem. They don't believe in his miracles. And therefore, tzarech hakibush liyos b'derech hateva. So the conquest of Eretz Yisrael is going to have to be not in a way of miracles, but in a natural way. Ubeteva hare azam v'hem dar hamidbar enam yecholim lichvashes Eretz Yisrael. The nations are in fact very strong, and the Dar Hamidbar will not be able to vanquish them. They won't be able to conquer them. It's not possible. B'derech hateva. So the gezerah remains. Sif Yud.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure, of course.
I don't really, if I'm understanding correctly, what I'm understanding is that Hashem forgave them because of Moshe's argument that the Mitzrayim will, what will happen with Mitzrayim. But really, they had no merit to be forgiven. Is that correct? Of their own.
So based on the Rebbe's question, why did Moshe Rabbeinu not have any other limit schus? Or why didn't he include any limit schus? It seems like they did have some schus. That's why the Rebbe questions, why doesn't Moshe try with a limit schus on them? So I don't know if we could say they had no merit.
Okay, because it's so hard to understand. What does it mean that they were forgiven? Like forgiveness, you don't forgive someone because it doesn't make sense. Do you understand my question?
Yeah.
Like if it says that Hashem removed the punishment, it's one thing, but he forgave them because of Mitzrayim?
I don't know if this will be helpful, but say you have a child who throws a can of red paint on a white couch. So there's the sin and there's the result. So you could forgive the sin, whether they deserve it or not, for whatever reason. It could be a very logical thing, like I shouldn't have had red paint available to a 2-year-old. Or even more logically, I shouldn't have bought a white couch with a 2-year-old, okay? Whatever. You could have ways of understanding why you should forgive the sin. You still have to deal with the red paint on the couch. So the Rebbe is saying the red paint on the couch is their lack of emunah. And for that reason, they did not merit going into Eretz Yisrael because they weren't calibrated with the whole Oifen Hanisi. But to forgive their sin, it could be because of Chosim, it could be because what are people going to say?
So is the forgiveness on the fact that they didn't have bitachon, or is on the forgiveness on what they actually did?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that definitively. It seems to me probably both. Salachti, but I'm still dealing with people, still dealing with that stain. I'm still dealing with the fact that these people have a deficit in their amunah. And therefore, I can't deal with them with l'mayla miderech hateva because they're stuck in teva.
Okay, thanks.
But I think I'm not answering something that's still bothering you. If I'm understanding correctly, you're saying that's why Hashem forgave them. Not because be'etzem they should be forgiven, but because of Hashem's reputation, as it were. So the Rebbe is explaining
right, like your example is good, but it really
right.
explains the other way.
But the Rebbe is explaining. Rashi says that he forgave them because of what Moshe said. But the Rebbe is saying Moshe said that because that was the only way to stop Hashem in his tracks. Because, in other words, to use Hashem's own argument. Hashem is saying, there's a lack of faith in me, so therefore I have to act in a certain way. So Moshe is saying, wait a minute. You're going to exacerbate the problem if you do that. So I think what's bothering us is we normally think of like forgiveness coming because they ask for forgiveness, because they deserve forgiveness, because they change themselves. And here it seems it's coming for like a kind of a window dressing reason. And
you could say, sorry.
No, please, everybody jump in if you have a way.
You could say that what Moshe said really awakened a lot. What people are going to say, like what will people say? Because the Yidden are the Yidden, they're Amanifchar. And because Hashem chose us, so Moshe was like awakening with that question of something very deep in Hashem and reminding who the Yidden are.
Because Hashem always wants to forgive. It's in his DNA to forgive. He wanted to forgive. He just needed like an excuse to hold back a little bit. But really, that's what he wanted. He always wants to forgive.
And Hashem wanted Moshe to say what he said. Continuing what you just said,
yes,
Jaffe, sorry, Mrs. Jaffe, what you just said. Continuing, Hashem always wants to forgive, but he waited. He wanted, like Hashem wanted the imahis to daven for tefillah, for children. So Hashem wanted Moshe to say whatever it was and to bring out, because like Pashas Emor, to bring out by saying that the Yidden Adam Nifkar. Whatever.
Could you say like in a nimshal that like we can't always forgive another person because that person had a deep internal change? You just can't do that. You can't wait for the other person to have a deep internal change. Sometimes you just have to forgive. Is that possible or am I jumping?
No, I think everything that everybody said, I think maybe what's bothering Chani, and it was bothering me also that Rashi says, Keperish Rashi, in the last paragraph before Seif Yud, Rebbe says, Valzeh Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu LaMoshe Salachi Ketavarecha, or Keperish Rashi, Bishvil Ma She'amarta Pen Yomer Mebilti Yecheles Hashem. In other words, yeah, the Eibishter loves us, and we're the Amma Nifchar, and the Eibishter forgives us even when we're not deserving, and wants to forgive us. All of this is true. But Rashi is saying, Why did Hashem forgive us? Because of Moshe's argument, what will the people say? It's like saying, it sounds like it's saying, right? Obviously, there's something here we have to understand better. Certainly I have to understand better. But topically, it sounds like you're saying, I'm going to forgive my kid because what will the neighbors say? Like, I'm such a horrible mother, I can't forgive my kid. So I'm going to have to forgive my kid.
It also brings out the gravity of Chilul Hashem, and the whole thing is to make a Dilo Yisbarach. And you understand, it's like, I don't, okay, maybe just I don't have a problem with it. Okay,
Yeah,
so
no, everything is true what you're saying. All's good and fine. The question is on what Rashi's saying here. I think that's what's stuck in the throat. See if you'd. Al pikol anal, move on. Mipnei mahu chak Rashi kan lefarish vayinasu kimashmoi. So now we're in a better position to understand why Rashi needs to underscore here that vayinasu is literally they tested. Even though as the Rebbe already told us earlier, in the next few psukim, you would be very, you could be forgiven if you were to think that here vayinasu means it was about provocation, because afterwards the pasuk says they made Hashem angry. They didn't listen to his voice. But when you zoom out and you look at the whole picture of the whole story, it's proven we see that in the aggregate, this is about a deficit in faith of that generation. And this was the reason for the Gezerah that Hashem says you're not going to see the land. And now we're going to understand why Rashi, again, remember the questions the Rebbe says, if you're not going to list all 10, why are you listing 6 out of 10? And if you are going to list 6, why did you delete 2? Test 3 and 4 as listed in Erchen. So we'll be able to understand because it's specifically in these instances of their testing of Hashem, mudgash v'nikar goydel hachisaron b'chayzek ha'emunah shel Yisrael, because it is in these instances that is recognized the great lack in emunah. She'al pizeh muva mepnei ma loy haya b'yecheles Moshe lifel as bittul hagzer im yuras haaretz, and we'll understand why Moshe was able to hold off Hashem's wrath from blighting them and annihilating them in one fell swoop, but why he was unable to revoke the Gezerah that they wouldn't be able to see Eretz Yisrael. Yud Aleph, v'habir bazeh. Now the Rebbe says, based on everything I have taught you, now you'll understand the explanation. Le'il b'kasov. Above this pasuk, we found a pasuk, She'amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Ad ana lo ya'aminu bi b'chol ha'osos gomer. Until when are you not going to listen to me? Ma she'en kein kan, k'shemedubar oides gezeres im yuras haaretz. But when the Eibishter says you're not going to see the land, halashon he, the exact terminology is, and they tested me. And here it doesn't say it doesn't say they didn't believe in me, it says they tested me. Rashi, and from this, Rashi specifies that the sin of testing Hashem is a more serious test than not believing, period. Bifrat zeh miloi ha'aminu bi stam. V'lachein hu mishamesh siba lekach she'af acha Shesalach HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael al chetem b'ba'efen shel kidvarecha lo yochlu lichbeish es Eretz Yisrael. So even though Hashem forgave them kidvarecha, but still they weren't able to conquer the land. Ubemahu hachomer devayanusu oisi. Okay, so now the Rebbe is saying, Rashi is telling us that their sin here was worse than just generic not believing. How was it worse? Afilu legabe lo yeminu bistam. How is this a worse sin than not believing? Hari hadavar muvim. The Rebbe says it's understood. Kasha matzav hu shelo yaminu bi b'chol ha'osos asher asisi b'kirboi hainu she'ein ma'aminim ba'osos Hashem hagiluyim yeshna eitzel lezeh. When you have people that don't believe in Hashem, they don't believe in all the open miracles that Hashem did, there's a recourse. There's a solution. Lahar Aisam Neis Umayfes Gadol Mufla Yesesh Al Yada Yiyu Mukhrachim Lahamin B'Yecheles Hashem. If they don't believe in the miracles so far, you knock their socks off with bigger miracles, with more overt wonders. And that's going to have to bring them to believe. Ubaloshin Akasav V'hayim lo yaminu gaimer l'kala eis harishon v'yaminu l'kala eis ha'achron. It's a pasuk of Shemais. They don't listen to the first voice; they'll listen to the later voice. Avol vayinasu oisi. But now the Rebbe is going to parse what is the exact sin, the problem, the pathology with vayinasu oisi. The Rebbe says in Yanai, the content of vayinasu, different from lo ya'aminu, is it's a matzav shel anoshim haroyim loshen hoive es kvoidi ves oisesai asher asisi b'mitzrayim b'midbar. You're talking about people who not their parents or their grandparents or somebody in a different country saw. They presently are bearing witness to all kinds of wonders and miracles. They see it, they know it. Nevertheless, they test Hashem, and not once or twice, but 10 times, until it brings them to not being able to listen to Hashem. And so if you're dealing with people who refuse to be confused with the facts, how's it going to help to show them bigger miracles, more miracles? They will still push back. They will still test. Yud Beis. And now the Rebbe says, let me explain to you, what does it mean that they tested Hashem? There's a very, very distinct quality to, like an MO, to how they tested Hashem. Now you're going to understand why Rashi listed these 3 pairs of tests. Because these 3, and remember, he skipped over one pair that the Gemara mentioned, they have a certain quality. They have an oxymoronic quality about them. They see Hashem's greatness, they see Hashem's wonders. They see, they acknowledge, they merit, they enjoy, they profit from these great miracles. And at the same time, they test Hashem in that very same thing. It's not the pshat that Hashem does a wonder and a miracle, but in another area of their life, they're testing Hashem. No, in that very thing. And the Rebbe delineates, Biyam, Hanisayan Hasheni, Haya B'shas Aliyasa Min Hayam, Sha'amru Yisrael Kishem Sha'anu Oile Mitzad Zeh Kach Mitzrayim Oile Mitzad Acher. Okay, let's take the first two. Okay, B'meila, before they go into the Yam, they're scared, they're anxious, they don't see what's going to happen, they express themselves in a not nice way. Okay, but when they come out on the other end and they say, oh, just like we're coming out, the Mitzrayim are probably coming out the other way, same old. Ba b'shah she'asalem HaKadosh Baruch Hu es hanes hagadol d'kriyas Yamsuf. Hine b'shas ma'aseh gufa. At that very moment that Hashem did for them kriyas Yamsuf, nisu Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'tanu shema nitzlu gam ha'Mitzrayim. The same, they're just in the miracle, and they're already testing Hashem and complaining, oh, Hashem probably did the same thing for the Mitzrayim. Discounting the miracle that they were then experiencing. The Rebbe shows the same thing with Shnayim b'mon. Al teitzu vayetzu, al tesiru vayesiru. Haman hayanes golui. The man was nothing less than an obvious, overt miracle. Bria Chadasha, the Ramban says it was a wholly new creation. Lechem min hashamayim. Ubeman, va'al yedei haman gufa, nisu b'nei Yisrael HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And with this tremendous miracle, wonder, in this and with this, they tested Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tziva al tesiru, v'him nisu HaKadosh Baruch Hu v'yasiru. Hashem said, don't leave anything over from one day to the next. They left over. HaKadosh Baruch Hu amar shabiyam HaShabbos lo yases hanes yiridas hamon v'shelachein al teitzu. Hashem told them right away from the beginning that He's not going to bring down man on Shabbos. Do not go out on man. Do not go out on Shabbos to collect the man. They went out. V'hem yatsu, l'sodek kedei l'naser sheliris es im yorad hamon. Shem aloy niskaimu divrei HaKadosh Baruch Hu she'b'Shabbos lo yases hanes yiridas hamon. Really? Here they are collecting the man day after day, collecting their raw food vegan man and their light, man and their lactose intolerant man. Everything is good. And yet they're still questioning if Hashem is good on His word that He's not going to bring down man on Shabbos. Same thing with the Slav. Dahainu meaning day after day the man came down. Ulashitas Rashi, and according to Rashi, and if you look at the footnote, because I got very confused by this, it's not Rashi in Chumash, it's Rashi in Gemara. Rashi teaches Gam Slav. Slav also came down day after day with the man. Afal Pikain. Bisha shehisivu taiva, but when their taiva got overcame them, ratzu teisefes basar, yachal hayu la'ales behem safek, umemele v'yinasu miyachilenu basar. But when they wanted more steak, then they started to test Hashem, who's going to give us meat? They're testing and they're questioning. Hashem's not going to be able to give them enough meat on top of the meat that Hashem already gave them.
Give a question, please. 1 second. We know that by the man, people that went out on Shabbos was from the Erev Rav.
Yeah.
So are we saying over here that the people that tested Hashem by the Slav were also from the Erev Rav? So it wasn't all of Bnei Israel. It was just a select few.
Same thing with Cheta Egel. One of the biggest, the Rashi says in Cheta Egel that every time Yidden are punished, a little bit of the punishment is because of, and for Cheta Egel, it's like the starter.
Right, we know Cheta, right.
Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's and there's a lot of answers for this. You could say that shtika kahidaya, the fact that Bnei Yisrael allowed this to happen is in some sense they're also acquiescing to the sin and so on and so forth. So in other words, you're right that even though it's just a few people, but it was a blight, it was a fleck on all of Klal Yisrael that they allowed this to happen. It showed that they all didn't have enough emunah.
But it was the Erev Rav. It wasn't the cream la cream that did this.
Okay, but lemashal, okay? When you are vociferously against something, if let's say somebody in your house says something, you shut them down. If it's disgusting to you, if it's wrong, if it's against the ethos, you shut them down. Masha Inkain, if maybe you a little bit agree, you let them say it even. And you didn't say it, your husband didn't say it, most of your kids are not saying it, but somebody's saying it and it wasn't shut down like a kibosh. That means that there's a shemetz of, oh, maybe this person is right, what they're saying. And I think it's the same thing here, that they all got blamed, all of Klal Yisrael. It's like it's a stain on our record, even though it was certain people. If somebody has a different explanation, because it's a good question, that's how I understand it. But
I think it's a lesson to us that we're all responsible for each other. Everything's happening all the time. Oh, those Jews. Okay, that's the way it is. We are just one. I mean, even after Chet HaEgel, when all the people who were punished with Chet HaEgel, it's not like there were no Jews left. There was a lot of Bnei Yisrael left. A lot of them got punished, but there were a lot left, meaning not everybody sinned, but we get punished because we're one.
Yeah, it's a mute, shibim mute. It's less than 2%. So that, the Rebbe says, is why Rashi showcases these 6 sins, because they, in very stark manner, teach us what vayinasu means. What was the particular way in which Bnei Yisrael tested Hashem? Masha enkin hanisyonis ha'acherim, but in contradistinction, the others, shnayim b'mayim, cheta egel v'cheta meraglim, ein behem davar v'hifuchay ba'isa inyan. It's a different kind of a sin. And yes, it's a test, but it's not this characteristic that Rashi is showcasing, where in the goodness that Hashem is giving you, in that you push back against him. And that's why Rashi doesn't delineate them clearly and in full-throated fashion.
But why can't we say that about the Chet HaEgel? Hashem just revealed himself to them, and now they're doing Chet HaEgel. So it does seem like it's all in the, like, Davar V'Hifuchai.
In terms of time, but not in terms of, like, I guess you could have said it if they would have, I don't know, made the luchais into chalila, something that they worship, let's say. You know what I'm saying? Like, davar v'hifuchai is that mamish in the thing, you're doing the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
I think that might be Yud Gimel. Min ha'irayis mikol hanal b'avedis Hashem. So there's a lot to think already here. I think each one of us, I don't even think we need to tease it out. I think the Rebbe is very clear here, how we have to appreciate what the Eibusha gives us and not chalila, test Hashem. Rebbe says, min ha'erois mikol hanal b'avedis Hashem. V'hechrach liskor. We must remember. Ad kama yesh liyai zahir v'zaris. How punctilious and how quick we must be to understand sha'aisa shemara kadosh baruch hu lefaret leprat uleklal yifalu b'mloi hataykef u'b'maise b'poil u'b'pnimius. We have to be careful and we have to be quick and jump on this, that the nisim that Hashem does for us should affect us completely and strongly and a maisa b'poil and in a very internalized way. And the Rebbe says it's clearly kal v'chomer. In bidar deya, the dar hamidbar, hayamokim lekach she'achar ha'oisis yiskayim bayenusu ha'oisis ha'eser pamim. If for that generation, the dar hamidbar, the dar deya, they were such an exalted generation, if for them it was possible for them to test Hashem in this way, al achas kama v'kama bidar deikvus Mashiach. How much more plausible it is that we, in this generation, the Ikvus Mashiach would do the same. And therefore, Shatzarach Lifa Velases a Kedev Daos Shechshaj Ze Eine Kayim Klal. We have to be vigilant. We have to make very sure that there should be no chash, there shouldn't even be a suspicion of Chalila engaging in this behavior. Bal Yedei Zeh. Shekol echad yisbainin ba'oise she'asa kadosh baruch hu b'nei Yisrael b'chlal, v'im kol echad ve'echad b'frat. And through our contemplating the miracles and the wonders that Hashem did for b'nei Yisrael in general, and for each one of us in particular, his baininus ba'oifen hamemale ha'choderes metzias ha'adam lagamri, contemplation that fills us, that permeates us, that pervades us. Not just a quick thinking about it, not even maybe a prolonged rumination, but a contemplation that saturates our being. This prepares us to go into Eretz Yisrael, Ayidei Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'geula Hamitis, Hanitzchis, with the true and the eternal redemption, she'ein achareha golos, which will not be followed by golos, u'ba'ofen k'haftachas hakasuv, and like the famous pasuk from the Navi Micha that the Rebbe never tired of citing, k'mei tzeischam eretz Mitzrayim, she'yitzia zuheis alidei oisais, that it should be like in the days when I took you out of Mitzrayim. And our leave taking from Mitzrayim was with great miracles. Asher asisi b'Mitzrayim, Kain b'karev mamish. So too, very soon, our enu niflais, the Eibusha should show us wonders, miracles. Eibusha should have rachmanis on all of us, and the situation in Israel, which seems to be escalating every day, and should show us Eisais and Moifsim. Should have rachmanis on our more global situation and bring us the Geula and bring us our Rebbe and make the Gimel Tama should be the biggest Yom Tov ever.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
But you want to do your trick? Maybe some people want to.